Hello and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a huge and incredibly sobering topic. World War II. Looking at the sources, it's just immense. This wasn't only a war, was it? It feels more like a global earthquake. It completely reshaped the planet, redrew maps, changed history forever, millions of lives lost, nations shattered. It's almost hard to comprehend. So our mission today really is to try and make sense of that scale, to grasp the gravity, and to do that, I think we have to start right at the beginning. Trace that path from the end of the First World War to the outbreak of the Second.
Absolutely. And the stage, well, it was undeniably set by the Treaty of Versailles back in 1919. The sources really hammered this home. Germany was blamed for the Great War, saddled with impossible reparations, and just, well, deeply humiliated. And this, it created this perfect storm: economic ruin, fertile ground for extremism. You had Mussolini and the fascists taking power in Italy, Imperial Japan becoming more aggressive in Asia, and then critically, Adolf Hitler in Germany. He was incredibly adept at exploiting that chaos, finding scapegoats, promising a return to glory, all built on this horrific doctrine of racial supremacy. By 1933, the Nazis were in control. It's frankly chilling how quickly that happened. Shows how economic despair and that kind of demagoguery can just gut democratic foundations.
Yeah.
A really stark lesson from the accounts.
It really is. That fragility is quite something. So given that background, how did Hitler manage to just ignore the Treaty of Versailles so openly? And why didn't the world react more strongly, earlier on?
Yeah, that's the crucial question, isn't it? Hitler didn't wait. He started rebuilding the German military, the Wehrmacht, completely against the treaty. Then 1936, German troops just march into the demilitarized Rhineland.
And the reaction?
Well, there were protests, diplomatic notes, sure, but no real action, nothing concrete. And that just emboldened him, you see. It sent a signal. Yeah. So 1938, you get the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, again, not much resistance, and then Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. That led to the Munich Agreement. Britain and France, they were just desperate to avoid another war like the last one. So they pursued this policy. Appeasement basically gave Hitler what he wanted there.
Chamberlain's peace for our time.
Exactly. Famous words, but ultimately a total illusion. It really exposed how deeply war-weary Europe was. They prioritized avoiding conflict almost above all else, even when the warning signs were, well, flashing red. A real lesson in strategic blindness, maybe.
Appeasement. Born from trauma, you could say, but it completely misjudged Hitler's aims. His ambition seemed limitless. So what was the final straw? What finally shattered that illusion and tipped the world into war?
The absolute breaking point was September 1st, 1939. The accounts describe it vividly. Before dawn, German tanks, planes, infantry just pouring across the Polish border, unleashing blitzkrieg, lightning war.
Not just a tactic.
No, exactly. It was speed, coordination, air and ground hitting together, designed to overwhelm, to paralyze the enemy psychologically before they could even mount a proper defense. It fundamentally changed warfare. Moving away from those static lines of the First World War, Poland fought incredibly bravely, but the speed and force, they were just overwhelmed. 2 days later, Britain and France, honoring their guarantee to Poland, declared war on Germany. And that was it. World War II had begun.
And then there was that weird period, wasn't there? On the Western Front, things were quiet for a bit. The phony war, they called it.
That's right. Several months of uneasy calm in the West, almost like holding your breath. Then, April 1940, Hitler moved north. Denmark fell in, like hours. Norway put up a fight but succumbed after a few weeks. But May 1940, that's when the real storm broke over Western Europe. Holland, Belgium, overrun. And the French army, which everyone thought was so powerful, along with the British Expeditionary Force, they were just outmaneuvered, pushed back to the coast, trapped at Dunkirk.
Dunkirk, that feels like such a critical moment. The sources often call it a miracle. What did that evacuation tell us about the war at that point?
Oh, it was extraordinary. A moment of sheer desperation and improvisation. You had hundreds of small civilian boats, fishing boats, pleasure crafts sailing alongside the Royal Navy, all heading to Dunkirk under constant attack from the Luftwaffe to rescue the trapped soldiers. Over 330,000 Allied troops were evacuated off those beaches. It was chaotic, dangerous. But it showed, I think, that this war was going to demand everything from everyone, not just soldiers, ordinary people rising to an unbelievable challenge. But the strategic situation was dire. Weeks later, France surrendered. By June 1940, Hitler was essentially the master of Western Europe. Only Britain, now led by Winston Churchill, stood alone against him.
Yeah, and that's when Churchill gave those speeches, still powerful today. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall never surrender. Setting the tone for defiance. And then the fight moved to the skies over Britain itself.
Exactly, the Battle of Britain. All through the summer of 1940, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, launched huge bombing raids. Their goal was to smash the Royal Air Force, the RAF, clear the way for an invasion. But the RAF pilots, many just young guys, plus volunteers from occupied countries, the Commonwealth, they fought back fiercely. The few, Churchill called them.
In their Spitfires and Hurricanes.
That's right. They were often outnumbered, but they had crucial advantages. Early radar technology was key. It gave them warning, helped direct the fighters, and just incredible courage from those pilots. They inflicted enough losses on the Luftwaffe that Hitler had to postpone and eventually cancel the invasion plan, Operation Sea Lion. Britain survived. It was a massive turning point, really. It showed Hitler wasn't invincible, a victory built on tech and pure grit.
So, locked in the West, Hitler then makes this enormous, fateful decision. He turns east. Operation Barbarossa, what was the thinking there? What was the gamble?
A huge gamble. June 22nd, 1941. Operation Barbarossa launches. We're talking about the largest invasion force ever assembled up to that point. Something like 3 million German soldiers pouring into the Soviet Union. Stalin seems to have been caught completely by surprise, despite warnings. The Red Army suffered absolutely catastrophic losses initially. Millions captured or killed. The Germans pushed deep, heading for Moscow, Leningrad, the Caucasus oil fields.
It looked like they might succeed, didn't it?
For a while, yes, but they made critical errors. They massively underestimated Soviet resilience, the sheer will to fight for their homeland. They underestimated the impact of the brutal Russian winter. Their equipment wasn't prepared, soldiers weren't prepared, and they underestimated the sheer vastness of the country. Supply lines got stretched thin. It was a classic case, you could say, of hubris, overconfidence, ideological blindness leading to a catastrophic strategic overreach.
And while all this is unfolding in Europe and Russia, the conflict truly explodes onto the global stage. Japan, which you mentioned earlier, had its own expansionist ambitions. And then December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor.
A date which will live in infamy, President Roosevelt's words. The attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Hawaii was a stunning tactical success for Japan, but a massive strategic blunder. It brought the industrial might of the United States fully into the war. Japan then followed up with lightning conquests across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines. For a time, their advance seemed unstoppable. The war was now well and truly global, every continent touched by it.
So the Axis powers seemed dominant in late 41, early 42. But many sources, many historians, point to 1942 as the turning point. What combination of factors really started to shift the momentum against the Axis that year? It wasn't just one battle, was it?
No, it was definitely a confluence of events across multiple theaters.
Yeah.
And maybe also the growing coordination between the Allies. In the Pacific, the big one was the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Critically, U.S. naval intelligence had broken Japanese codes. They knew the attack was coming, so they set an ambush. And in a matter of hours, dive bombers sank 4 Japanese fleet aircraft carriers, their main strike force. Absolutely devastating for Japan. It crippled their naval air power and shifted the strategic initiative in the Pacific to the United States. That really marked the beginning of the long, brutal island-hopping campaigns. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, later Iwo Jima, reclaiming territory island by island. It highlighted how vital intelligence was becoming alongside industrial power. Then in North Africa, late 1942, the British 8th Army under General Montgomery finally achieved a decisive victory over Rommel's Afrika Korps at El Alamein in Egypt.
Pushing them back.
Pushing them back, yes. And just weeks later, American and British forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, Operation Torch. This created a pincer movement, squeezing the remaining Axis forces in North Africa between 2 Allied armies. It showed effective Allied cooperation in land and sea operations. But arguably the most significant turning point of 1942, stretching into early 43, was on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad.
Just the name evokes something brutal.
It was beyond brutal. Ferocious house-to-house, street-by-street fighting. The city was just pulverized. But the Soviets held on. And during the harsh winter, they launched a counteroffensive that encircled the entire German 6th Army, hundreds of thousands of men. Hitler refused to let them break out. They were eventually destroyed or forced to surrender. Stalingrad wasn't just a defeat for Germany, it was a catastrophe. It broke the back of their army on the Eastern Front, it shattered the myth of German invincibility for good, and marked the beginning of the long, bloody Soviet push westward towards Berlin. It really underscored the immense cost of Hitler's overreach.
And while these colossal battles were deciding the military fate of nations, something else. Something truly monstrous was happening, largely hidden from view initially. The sources are unequivocal. We have to confront the Holocaust.
Yes. It's the darkest chapter, a moment where humanity failed on an unimaginable scale. It demands our attention, always. Driven by Nazi racial ideology, the regime systematically murdered 6 million Jewish people, and millions more victims too. Roma, Sinti, Slavic peoples, people with disabilities, political opponents, LGBTQ+ individuals, murdered in concentration camps, in purpose-built death camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, through mass shootings by Einsatzgruppen. The sheer scale, the industrialized bureaucratic nature of the genocide. It's chillingly documented in the historical records. It's a terrifying demonstration of what happens when extreme ideology combines with state power and the deliberate dehumanization of entire groups of people.
A reality we must never, ever forget or minimize. So returning to the military front, by 1943, 1944, the tide had clearly turned. Allied pressure was building everywhere.
It was, steadily. The Allies invaded Sicily, then mainland Italy, forcing Italy out of the war eventually. The fighting there was tough. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army liberated Kiev, pushed the Germans out of Soviet territory, and began advancing into Poland. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy and Marines were tightening the noose, island by island, getting closer to Japan itself. All this pressure, this buildup, was leading towards the decisive blow in the West, the operation to liberate France, D-Day.
June 6, 1944. Operation Overlord. We hear about the scale, the largest amphibious invasion ever, but looking at the sources, what stands out about the execution, and what did it demand from the soldiers hitting those beaches?
The scale itself is staggering, yes. Thousands of ships, thousands of planes, over 150,000 Allied troops landing on 5 beaches in Normandy on that first day: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. But it wasn't just about numbers. It required incredible planning, coordination, deception to mislead the Germans about the landing site. And on the day, especially on some beaches like Omaha, Bloody Omaha, as it became known, the German resistance was ferocious.
Heavy casualty.
Very heavy. Men wading ashore under intense machine gun fire, artillery, facing heavily fortified German positions. The courage required just to get off the landing craft and move forward onto those beaches. It's almost unimaginable. It demanded extraordinary individual bravery, sacrifice, on top of all the complex logistics and strategy. But they did it. They secured those vital footholds. That beachhead was the key to liberating France and ultimately defeating Germany in the West. And from there, the advance continued. By August 1944, Paris was liberated, a huge symbolic moment. Allied armies pushed into Germany from the west. Meanwhile, the Soviets were relentlessly advancing from the east. Hitler, by early 1945, was trapped in his bunker beneath Berlin, apparently ordering fantasy counterattacks detached from reality. The final Battle of Berlin was apocalyptic, street-fighting desperation. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide. And then on May 7th, what was left of the German High Command surrendered unconditionally.
VE Day. Victory in Europe.
Yes, huge celebrations erupted across the Allied nations. Relief, joy, but also exhaustion and grief.
But as you said, the war wasn't totally over yet. It was still raging fiercely in the Pacific. Japan, despite facing defeat, massive bombing campaigns, a naval blockade, they fought on with incredible tenacity, refusing to surrender, which led to, well, a terrifying new chapter in warfare, the atomic bomb.
A terrible decision, as you put it. Faced with the prospect of a bloody invasion of the Japanese home islands, which estimates suggested could cost hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lives on both sides, President Truman made the call. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima.
The devastation.
Instantaneous, unprecedented. A city obliterated in a flash. Tens of thousands killed immediately. Many more died later from radiation. Still, Japan didn't surrender. So 3 days later, August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Faced with this unimaginable power, and with the Soviet Union also declaring war and invading Manchuria, Emperor Hirohito finally intervened. On August 15th, he announced Japan's surrender over the radio. VJ Day, victory over Japan. The formal surrender documents were signed on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. After 6 long, brutal years, World War II was officially over. The aftermath. It's almost impossible to fully summarize. The human cost is just staggering. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 70 and 85 million people dead. Soldiers, civilians, victims of genocide.
Mind-boggling numbers.
Truly. Entire cities across Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The physical destruction was immense. Geopolitically, the world was transformed. Europe was divided, setting the stage for the Cold War. Colonial empires began to crumble. The map of Asia was redrawn, and the full horror of the Holocaust became undeniable as the camps were liberated. A profound moral reckoning for humanity. And of course, the world entered the atomic age under that mushroom cloud, a new era of existential threat, but also perhaps a grim deterrent. But out of that devastation, there were also attempts to build something better. The United Nations was formed, with the explicit goal of preventing future world wars. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted, trying to establish fundamental rights for everyone. Though, as we know, the Cold War division between the US-led West and the Soviet-led East quickly emerged, shaping the next half-century.
So, having gone through all this immense suffering, sacrifice, and complexity from the sources, the question really becomes, why remember? Why should you listening keep delving into this darkness? What's the point today?
It's a vital question. We remember first, I think, to honor the sheer scale of sacrifice and courage. Millions upon millions, the soldiers on all fronts, the resistance fighters in occupied countries, the nurses, the factory workers keeping production going, the civilians who endured bombing and occupation. Their experiences matter. We also remember to understand just how fragile peace really is, how quickly things can unravel. And crucially, we have to confront the dangers highlighted by this period. Unchecked hatred, extreme nationalism, racism, totalitarianism. These aren't abstract concepts. They have devastating real-world consequences. Learning about how these forces took hold, how appeasement failed, how propaganda worked, that's essential. It's about ensuring that never again isn't just a phrase we repeat, but a genuine act of commitment, informed by understanding how it happened before.
Absolutely. The echoes of World War II are still with us, aren't they? In our international institutions, our alliances, our anxieties, our collective memory. It's a story filled with darkness, yes, unimaginable darkness, but also, as you say, incredible resilience, profound sacrifice, and ultimately a persistent hope for a better, more peaceful world. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. As you reflect on everything we've discussed, think about those moments of choice throughout this history. Choices made by leaders, by nations, but also by ordinary individuals, choices that led towards escalation or sometimes towards resistance or prevention. How do those lessons about choice, consequence, and responsibility apply to the challenges and decisions we face in the world today? How can understanding this past help us navigate the future? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.